Hi everyone, thanks for joining us this afternoon for the webinar with Lucy and Claire from Equestrian Employers. I'm just going to be letting a couple of people in, so my attention might be drawn away momentarily. But thank you for joining us, whether you're live or whether you're with the recording to watch it retrospectively. We're going to go through some really important points today about employment and employment options for your yard. I'm going to give a quick introduction to myself, but I'll just do some housekeeping first. If everyone can have their microphones and their cameras off, that just makes it easier for us. If anybody has any questions, they can be put in the chat function on the bottom bar. If you're on a computer, there's two speech marks and you can type any chats and questions in there, and I will try to refer to them as we go along. If not, we can add any questions towards the end. You might want to have a pen and paper. Obviously, the recording of this will be available, and we will be sending out a follow-up email with the recording to this if you want to watch it again, and also the contact details of Equestrian Employers and any other relevant topics that we might cover and any useful resources from that point of view. So I will just give a quick introduction of myself for those that don't know me. I'm Cheryl Johns. I run LiveryList and the Yard Owner Hub, which is the UK's leading livery yard directory, but also an industry recognised resource for yard owners, whether it's riding schools, equestrian centres, livery yards, offering all sorts of resources, guidance, support and templates for the practical and administrative management of yards. Obviously, a lot of that we cover is involving employment as staff. So that's why we've got Lucy and Claire with us today, so that we can discuss the do's and don'ts of employment. So if I hand over to Lucy, and she will do an introduction of herself, followed by Claire, and then we'll get on with the discussion.
Thank you, Cheryl. Hello, everybody. I'm Lucy Katan. I'm the founder of the Equestrian Employers Association, but also the sister organisation, the British Grooms Association. And I run both organisations with my team. And Claire is one of our team, so I'll let Claire introduce herself.
Okay, so yeah, I'm Claire. I'm the Member Engagement Coordinator at the EEA, and basically what that means is that I provide HR advice to our members and keep everybody up to date on the ever-changing world of HR and employment law. So it's all about kind of getting that information out there and making sure our members are as informed as possible. And that's kind of my role.
Good. So the Equestrian Employers, I think, is quite well known now across the equestrian industry for helping yard owners understand compliance. But for those that don't know, Lucy, can you just tell us a bit about your background and how the Equestrian Employers came to be and what kind of the aims and goals are in supporting the industry?
Sure. So I'm a former international dressage groom, had some great times when I worked as a groom and also some not great times. That led me to forming the British Grooms Association about 18 years ago now, which makes me feel very old. And about, it was as old as my daughter, and she's 9 now. So about 9 years ago, an employer came to us, a rider, and said, I think we should do more for employers. I said, well, we do, because on the British Grooms Association, we have a bit of help there for employers. And they said, no, but an employer would never come to the BGA. And it was a real moment in time, because I thought, well, you're absolutely right. Why would an employer come to the British Grooms Association? They need their own body. So what we did was we formed the Equestrian Employers Association, and from then on, it has gone really quite well, to be honest, because we recognise that employers out there need somewhere to come and get advice and guidance that in many cases is equestrian specific, although of course employment law is the same across all sectors and industries. There's nothing specific about employment law, but we recognise that our employers in the equestrian sector needed a bit more hand holding. And also we were regularly getting asked for documents. Have you got a contract that I can download? Have you got this that I can download? And so what we've done, which we'll talk about a bit later with the EEA, and really one of the core benefits of it is that it's a smart online tool. So we have a variety of tools, from the contract creator to the staff handbook creator, etc., that are tools where all written by solicitors or reviewed by solicitors on a regular basis. They're front-end forms where we collate the information, and then we've done the hard work. So we don't give you Word documents, we give you the ability to produce your own documents, and that's one of the real benefits. And that's why our membership of the EEA is growing month on month, and we have a very good retention on our membership, which is interesting, because I think if you no longer employ staff anymore, then there's no reason to belong to the EEA. So that's fine, leave. But otherwise, HR is ongoing when you have a business. So that's the vision of the EEA, is to be really a help for equestrian employers, but also to recognise and a nod to those that do engage in what we call good employment, with a capital G and a capital E. And that's everything that we're about, because we want the equestrian industry, working alongside the BGA, to become a place of only good employment. And we know one of the things that, when I talk to employers all the time, that really annoys good employers are those that do it wrong, that purposely cheat, because what they're doing is they're undercutting all of you that do it right, and that's not fair. So we're getting louder and prouder on our ambition for an industry to be a place of only good employment.
Yeah, I think it's great. I mean, for those that don't know, I run a very large Facebook group specifically for yard owners, and there's always a lot that comes up on there about employment problems, whether they're using freelance staff or employed. And I always say a lot of yard owners fall into being business owners by accident, really, because they're horsey people. A lot of them are not business people, and definitely not people. And some of them kind of fall into being employers when actually that's never been their intention, and they have no idea of the scope of the regulations and the compliance needed. And I think between that and, like you say, Lucy, the people that are knowingly doing things incorrectly because it's easier or more cost effective, it's really good that you have that industry specific support. So from your experience, what do you find is the biggest issue that gets brought to you by the equestrian employers?
I think generally it's the cost of employing people. The biggest, I think, issue for people at the moment is the increase in national minimum wage. So we've just increased to 12.21, and it's going to go up, and it's going to go up. You're looking at predictions again, I think next year, of about 12.60, 12.65, something like that. So employers are coming to us and saying, we're finding this so hard to keep just paying the minimum wage. And I think they're looking at, do I need to reduce staff hours? Do I need to ultimately make redundancies? And it is a really difficult time for employers, I think, at the moment. And we're saying, look at what you can do to reduce your business costs, look at what you can do to manage those things that, within your control. But we are saying, whatever you do, please continue to employ people legally and compliantly, because otherwise, that's going to cause you massive issues. And it's what we want to do is encourage good employment, but we want to be able to help people maintain, their businesses and keep employing people, because that's the main issue, I think.
It comes up all the time to me as well. And as they say, an employer will say, I can't afford the national minimum wage. Well, it's not a choice. The risk is, you have to. Well, I can't. So I said, well, what's your solutions? The obvious solution is cut hours. And I know that many yards have already done this. And then we've got problems, and then it becomes more difficult. But I did speak to an event rider just a few weeks ago, who we had this conversation. What time does your yard start? 7 o'clock. What time do your yard finish? Well, usually not till 6. I said, well, you're running a long day. That's expensive. How many staff have you got? Well, 4. And they all do the same. Yes, 6 days a week, 7 till 6. Wow, that's a big wage bill. That's expensive. And I said, well, you need to start your yard a bit later. Well, I can't. And I said, well, all right. So one person comes in and feeds, does the morning shift on a rota type thing, and the rest start at 8:30. You'd be amazed at the money you save. Oh, no, I can't do that, she said. I said, well, why not? Well, because the yard has to be done by 9. I said, well, it says who? Well, of course, that's the way we operate. I said, but you can't afford to operate this way. So you have to look at your business model and the way you operate it. So I think there's a real issue. I would say a big issue also, Claire, is I don't know if you agree, because you speak to them a lot, more than myself, but is about modernisation and accepting that what went before cannot carry on unless you've got very deep pockets, and if you wish to run in that way, super. But
Yeah.
the honest answer is that you probably can't. So you need to modernize, and you have
I
to.
always say to people, do you need your tack to be cleaned every day? If you're paying somebody to clean your tack at the end of the day, does it need to be done every day? Can you cut back a little bit there? Where can you cut back? And I know, there are lots and lots of employers that are, I want to say old school. They want the yard to be super tidy. They want the tack to be clean. They want the muck heap to be looking great, and that's great. And if you can afford to do that, like you say, Lucy, if you can afford to do that and you can afford to pay people to do that, that's perfect. But can you cut back on those things? Because ultimately, that might be the difference between you keeping a member of staff and having to lose a member of staff.
Yeah, definitely. It's viability for yards is really difficult as it is. And I think it's people understanding where it's realistic to cut costs. So cut costs rather than cut corners. But so for those that don't employ legally, whether intentionally or not, what are the implications that people could face if they are not paying minimum wage, if they don't have employment contracts, so on and so forth?
So if you're not paying the national minimum wage, you can be reported to HMRC, and the consequences of that are obviously there's an investigation that will happen. They'll look into whether you've been paying or not. You're looking at, if you haven't been paying the national minimum wage, you're looking at fines, big fines. I mean, Lucy will be specific on the details of those, I'm sure, but in terms of the naming list as well is a massive issue, because there is a public naming list that is released annually. And employers, we have spotted equestrian employers on that list who haven't paid national minimum wage, and we do kind of look at that and say, that's a massive consequence. That's a huge public naming consequence for you. In terms of if you are got people working more hours than the working time directive, you're looking at consequences. Health and safety executive can impose fines on you. If your employees don't have contracts, you can be taken to an employment tribunal, have to go through an employment tribunal, and again face financial costs and reputational damage. So there's so much kind of out in terms of an employer who isn't employing legally. There are huge consequences potentially, and I think perhaps people aren't aware of those. And what we try to do with the EEA is make people aware and say, look, these are the consequences of not employing correctly, not employing legally, and and just try and raise awareness of those, because I do think perhaps yard owners aren't necessarily or don't necessarily think about it like that. I don't know if you'd agree, Lucy.
Totally. I mean, the fines are massive, and I think in the day of social media, I think grooms who are not paid correctly are coming around to the fact that actually to report is not that difficult, and they will report. And once the HMRC are knocking on your door, I'm afraid you are in the hands of a prosecutable enforcement agency, and they're not stupid. They've gone in and out of many equestrian businesses, and they will find out the truth, and the truth will out. So we've got a case at the moment with two grooms from the BGA where the employer had done everything wrong, everything. Grooms were being paid below the national minimum wage by their hourly rate, being overcharged for accommodation, no pay slips, no contract, and it goes on and on and on. And I'm very confident the girls are going to both win. The two girls that worked there, the girls are going to win. They have kept evidence of their time, and this employer, who obviously will remain nameless, unfortunately, I'm afraid, is going to meet a very big bill, because not only do they have to pay back the monies that are owed to the girls, which ultimately the employer has stolen off the two girls because it's hours that they have worked, but in addition, he's going to get a rather large fine, and the maximum fine per worker is £20,000. So there will be a fine, and it can be up to 200% of the underpayment. So this is going to be a very expensive situation, unfortunately, for that employer. And it all could have been avoided by doing it correctly. And it's evidence is key. So one of my pay forwards to everyone watching this is you need to protect yourself. And that's what we at the EEA are trying to help you to do. So have your contract of employment. The moment the HMRC knock on the door, the first thing they ask for is, can you show me the contracts of your staff? If you don't have a contract of employment for your staff and the correct employment status, you've just put your hands up to saying, I'm not doing it legally, because it's a legal requirement to have the contract of employment from day one. So that puts the enforcement officer going, okay, what else is wrong? Because you haven't done the most basic employment right. And that's what, from the EEA going forth, everything is on our website for you to use. And my other thing I would say is be very organized. And we're at some point, the EEA will be helping you more with this, but we're not there yet. But be very organized with logging your staff's working hours. Clock in, clock out, start time, finish time. Because again, if you can prove, got another employer, another story, another employer who actually is a good employer. I know they're a good employer and they have kept records. And I think they're probably going to be okay, actually. There might be a small fine, they've done one little thing wrong. But I think they actually, nobody reported them. I think they've just ended up on a sweep of an area, which is what the HMRC will do. And talking to that employer, I'd say they're probably okay because they've got time records of all their staff. They've paid correctly. They've got contracts. So you're not going to lose if you've done everything right. Yeah.
I think that's the thing. A lot of people that cut corners in an attempt to cut costs, it actually, a lot of the things, whether it's health and safety, employment, insurance, welfare standards, it's actually there to protect themselves, and they're the people that are going to be worse off and get a bite on the bum when it all goes wrong. You know, if you're not insured, you're the one that's going to be liable for all of the associated costs, same as you're saying, Lucy, about the fines for those that are employing incorrectly. It's, you know, cutting corners and cutting costs might be good and make your running costs less and keep your stables full because your prices are down, but ultimately it's a false economy if something goes wrong. And the likelihood is, if you're already cutting corners administratively, you're possibly cutting corners in other ways that are going to lead to that as well. Now, one of the questions that I see a lot and I get asked a lot is about employment status. A lot of people say that they use freelancers who are not employed, or they have staff and grooms but they're self-employed. So can we have a bit of definition between what's an employer, what's freelance, and what the general categories of employment would be? Okay,
I've shared the screen on this one. This is my bag because I talk about this on a daily basis. I'm going to my grave on this one, I tell you. So employment status is critical and it's the core of everything. And our delightful equestrian industry just doesn't understand it. And I could do webinar after webinar and try to reach everyone. But from the youth that are coming out of colleges to work to those that have been working for many, many years, they don't understand it and the implications. So I'm going to try and explain it to everyone on this call. And we're going to use Jane, Sam and Mandy, 3 girls who are 3 grooms. And if we're going to look at the difference, this is the slide I use in all my college talks, by the way. This is the main difference between these different employment statuses, okay? And there aren't that many employment statuses out there, let me just be clear. There are 3, okay? And then we have a volunteer, but there are 3 employment statuses, and you have to fit in one of the 3. So Sam is an employee. You have to imagine, how does this fit with my team, with my staff? Sam is an employee. She is required to work regularly, okay? She has a contract of employment. That contract of employment will be either a part-time or full-time. So that means she's got certain hours that are sort of full on or a little bit less. And that contract will have no end date, or it will be a fixed term. So i.e. it finishes on the whatever month, okay? And then the contract's out, she's unemployed from that time on. So her employer will set the salary. It's not a choice, it's not a discussion. There might be a slight discussion, but ultimately the employer sets what the salary must be, obviously applicable to the national minimum wage. She cannot refuse to do the work. So she's contracted to turn up. So she can't say, I'm not going to turn up. If she doesn't turn up, there's a disciplinary process there. She gets paid holiday, 28 days, worked out pro rata, less than 5.5 or 6 days a week. She's subject to the employer's discipline procedure. So this is the sign of control, which any employment tribunal will look at. Sign of control. The moment the employer, the rider, the yard proprietor is in control of that individual, it is more than likely that that individual is an employee or worker, which we'll come on to next. They need to give notice to the employer to take leave. They can't just say, I'm not going to come in. They have to ask permission. And there's, within the contract, there'll be the number of days. Most critically, she can't get someone else to do her work. She can't say, I can't come in today, but Johnny's going to come in instead of me. Okay, it's not possible. She is contracted to do the work herself. And the employer decides how, when, and where she does her work. Okay, so if they're going, so if within the contract there's flexibility for her to work, let's just say abroad for a show or something like that, the employer decides that she's got to do it, she's got to do it. That's part of her contract. And the employer provides the tools for work. Lots of people think that tools and equipment is a big decider. An employment tribunal will look at a number of different elements to identify employment status. So employment status is very much driver of other things. So for example, Sam must be paid by PAYE, and she would, if she was the right age, she would be applicable to a pension as well. Now, if we go on to Mandy, now Mandy's different, and this is an employment status the equestrian industry just does not understand, and it's called the worker. Okay, and you might have heard it in the gig economy terms. It's called a worker, and this is a 0 hours contract. You would have heard of that. So Mandy has a 0 hours contract, not that common in the equestrian world. We just, if anybody uses our contract creator, that produces an employment contract. As for an employee, we do have a downloadable 0 hours contract tool because it's not that common in the horse world. The work for the business is much more casual. So there's not a flexible, there's more of a flexible scenario. Okay, but the employer still sets the salary and she gets paid holiday and she must personally do the work. But the way that it works is that you're not guaranteed number of hours. Okay, so for example, if I'm the employer and I have a 0 hours contract with Mandy, I might offer her this many hours on a week because for whatever reason, and Mandy has the option to either take those hours or not take those hours. She has the right to turn it down if she so wishes. Okay, so that's the worker. Now think about the number of freelance grooms out there that actually probably are workers. Okay, because the whole time Mandy is working for said employer, she is under their control. Okay, she's under their direction. She's got to wear the uniform if there's uniform. She's got to abide by the disciplinary procedures within that yard. So she would be a worker. She's not freelance. She'd be a worker. Now we look at Jane. Jane is self-employed. She sets her own rates. She chooses where to work, when to work. She has clients. She doesn't have an employer. The moment that a freelance groom, so to speak, starts talking about their employer and that they've got to be there at this time, they've got to be there at that time, that then becomes much more likely to be a position of a worker or an employee. Whereas Jane is very much self-employed. She's got multiple clients. She runs her own business. She can replace herself if she so wishes. And she can choose when and where she works. So much more Jane is in control of the scenario. Okay, so that explains, I'll stop sharing, employment status. And false self-employment is rife in our equestrian industry, and the HMRC are really going to get much. You're going to hear much more in the news about this. We call it false self-employment. Just Google it. They sometimes call it bogus false self-employment, and it's a big problem in our industry. And what you tend to find is it is actually tax fraud. So on both sides, on both parts, it's tax fraud, and you've got to be really careful of it. And we're finding many more employers contacting us going, I don't think this person is self-employed. I don't think I should be. They're under my control. They're working for me 5 days a week. When they're here, I'm their boss. That should be employed, shouldn't it? And the answer is yes. More than likely, that is an employed scenario. So the HMRC would take a frown on certainly employer because you're not paying them by PAYE. They would be applicable to a pension or the opportunity of a pension and paid holiday, etc. From the groom's point of view, and the grooms can be a right pain on this because the grooms will go, oh no, I'm freelance. I want to be freelance. Well, actually, the tax man doesn't perceive it in that way. If you are only working for one person, you can't be a freelancer because the rules of being self-employed is that you have the ability to have more than one client. Okay, or the desire to. If you're working somewhere 6 days a week, there's no chance you can have more than one client. So the taxman would also see that as a tax fraud on your behalf as well.
Yeah, I think, sorry, I was just going to say,
right, carry on.
In terms of employers, I think perhaps more historically, employers have seen it as a cheaper way of employing staff, because they're not employing them really. They're not liable for their pension. They're not liable for their tax, their NI. So people have said, and if you are telling somebody that they are self-employed and you believe, and actually they should be employed, it's illegal. And like Lucy says, there are huge consequences. So you have to be really careful when you're thinking about taking on a member of staff. Should I be giving this person a contract of employment? And unless they are genuinely a freelancer, the answer is yes, they should have a contract of employment.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was just going to say, Claire, is that obviously it's another one of those situations where it can be a false economy. It's kind of, I think where a lot of yard owners' mindset comes from is if you employ somebody, it's permanent. You have all the costs of employing somebody, all the extra paperwork, being involved, PAYE, so on and so forth. But a freelancer, the attraction is obviously so much simpler because you can let them go when you want. There's no sort of employment regulations. I think that's why so many people try to find the alternatives to employment. So that's a really good breakdown, Lucy. You've spoken about employment contracts. So I often get asked if people use freelancers who we've just learned might not even be freelancers. But so, for example, if they use someone that genuinely is a freelancer, should they still be having a contract with those people to kind of outline the expectations, what the arrangements are, or are people just expected to have them with absolute employees or workers?
So in terms of an employment contract, what we would actually, legally speaking, that's known as a written statement of employment particulars. So it's not quite an employment contract, but that is a statement that you are employed by your employer. And that is very separate to the agreement that you might have with a freelancer. So a genuinely self-employed person, you wouldn't have a contract of employment with them. You would have a separate agreement about what their terms and conditions are. And anybody who's kind of a responsible freelancer, and again, that's kind of loosely in terms of the BGA, provide a freelancer agreement for their members. If you are a genuine freelancer, you should be providing a freelance agreement to each of your clients, and that will have your terms and conditions in there. And then you've kind of got volunteers as well. So if you use volunteers, I think it's always better to have a volunteer agreement as well. So a separate agreement. It's not an employment contract. It's not a freelance, agreement of providing services, but it is what you expect of volunteers in terms of like health and safety, and because you're still responsible for them, even though they're not employed by you, you're still responsible for their health and safety whilst they're on the yard. You're still responsible for them following the yard rules. So it's always good to have a volunteer agreement in place so that everybody knows where they stand, whether they're a genuine employee, whether they're a freelancer, or whether they're a volunteer.
I think the rule of thumb is, as far as if you're using the services of freelancer, and notice I've got quite good at using my terminology here. I sometimes slip up, but if you are using the services of a freelancer, because we don't want to scare people off, because actually there's some really great freelancers out there that run really good businesses. Okay, so if you're running a yard, and if you want to use you give all your staff a day off on let's just say on a Friday, Saturday, and you want to use a freelancer to come in on a Friday, you can become a regular client of that freelancer, but you have to be very clear that the way that you are a client of that freelancer, if that makes sense. So what I mean by that is that you should be saying to them, right, you're the freelancer, how much is it going to cost me? And can you provide me with your terms of this engagement? Now, sometimes the business can create a contract with that individual, so you can do it the other way around. But if I'm really honest, in the equestrian sector, that's quite rare, because usually it's for a fixed term period. Okay. So yeah, it's we can talk all about, well, let's keep moving forward because we'll be here forever. But again, that's where the EEA is here to help.
So right, we'll move on from that a little bit. But with your other hat on, Lucy, for those that are using the services of freelancers, So I worked as a freelance groom for years, 13 years in the UK. I was a member of the BGA. And it actually amazes me that through that time, over 13 years, I probably could have counted on one hand the number of yard owners that actually said to me, do you know what you're doing? Are you actually insured? Do you have any bias, any biosecurity? Are you competent? What's your experience? It's you literally the same as people find them now. Oh, we found a groom on Facebook. We've invited them. I'm going to let them loose on a yard full of potentially high value competition horses. Just some randomer. I was competent and I was insured, just to point out. But for those people that are thinking of using freelancers, with your other hat from the BGA on, Lucy, what should yard owners be asking these freelancers before they're even on the yard with access, in terms of, making sure that everybody is nice and safe by the services that are being carried out?
Yeah, so I mean, again, that's about them being professional. They should have first of all client agreements that they're giving to you. That's a good sign of somebody being professional. From the BGA website, they can get these for free as part of their membership. They produce their own. It's an online tool. But I would want to see my freelance groom have their own liability insurance. So on the BGA website, we sell freelance groom liability insurance. It's a great policy, KBIS policy. And if a freelance groom has purchased that, they can do a little thing called a certified BGA freelance certification. They get a little logo that they can do on our website, which is again all about professionalism. Because if you're paying somebody to come and look after your horses, you want them to be insured. And why do you want them to be insured? Because if they cause an accident with one of your horses, you want that level of insurance there to reassure you. Now, you can only go so far because it's got to be proven that they were negligent. We have to remember that insurance is just not going to pay out for certain situations, every situation. But I would definitely be looking at any freelancer that is working, well, delivering services for me. See, look, I nearly slipped up there. Delivering services for me, I would want them to have insurance because it's a sign of professionalism and that they're not just decided to do this at a whim. So, and all the insurance is there. It's easy to purchase. I'm just looking at the chat and there is a question from Anna, which I thought just worth picking up.
Yeah.
Anna, thank you for your question. How do people clock evidence working hours? Is there an app or just physically sign in, sign out? Well, there's many an app. So just Google working hours and you can go and get it. But I'm going to be honest with you, we've done a lot of research and some of these apps become quite expensive when you tally up a number of staff. So at the EEA, we are producing an app for, well, a sign in, sign out system for our members, but it's going to take some time. We're not there yet, I'm afraid. It's a big piece of development, and if I'm really honest, we're probably 6 months to a year away from being able to launch it as much as we'd like to get going. But at the very least, a physical sign in, sign out by initials and time is a great thing to have. So yeah. So Anna, you only have one member of staff. That's easy then. You just get a piece of paper and get them to sign in, sign out. So, but eventually our app system will be really, really good because it's really going to help you. And again, it's about protecting yourself and about having clarity. And should a freelancer provide you with a proof of being correctly self-employed? Well, they can't provide you proof of being correctly self-employed in the sense of there's not necessarily a piece of paper that shows you that. But by having, if you ask the question, do you have other clients? Are you registered at the HMRC for self-assessment? Do you have your own freelance groom liability insurance? Can I have your client agreement? Do you want to write it up and give it to me? All of those would be signs that they're correctly self-employed, if you want to call it that. But just bear in mind that just because somebody is registered for self-assessment with the HMRC, if they're working for one person full time, that's null and void, because it's the employment tribunal looks at all these different elements and come up with employment status. But there is a great new online tool, isn't there, Claire?
There is the HMRC checking tool to check whether you are self-employed for tax purposes. So you can actually check out your own employment status, or you can check out somebody else's employment status. If you suspect that someone's status is incorrect, you can go on there, and it's really detailed. If you go into the .gov website and type it in or Google it, it'll come up. But really detailed. It takes you through some quite in-depth questions, but actually at the end of it, it will say that you are self-employed for the purposes of tax. So that's a really good sort of way of checking, and I think it's a really good piece of we've sort of said it's a good piece of evidence to have if you do that and you need to have a discussion with someone about their employment status. If you've gone through the employment status checker, you've got that as evidence that you can then have a discussion about. So even if you do that with a member of staff and you do it together, then you can check everybody's employment status. So it's really, really useful tool.
Yeah, that's really good. Claire, you touched briefly when we were talking about contracts just now about volunteer agreements for people that volunteer. And I know that this probably applies quite a bit to riding schools who have lots of willing helpers. But also you do get all sorts of livery yards that have people working there on a voluntary basis. Where does the law stand in terms of helpers? Because like Lucy was saying, time has moved on and long gone are the days of having 20 kids running around a riding school willy-nilly doing their own thing every Saturday. It's a lot more complicated now, which unfortunately in some respects is putting an end to that kind of aspect of riding schools. But can you just explain the considerations if people are using volunteers or having youngsters on the yard?
Sure. So I mean, I used to volunteer at a riding school a very long time ago when I was maybe only 10 or 11. So, and like you say, things have really moved on since then. And obviously safeguarding has become so much more prevalent now. And, and the laws around volunteering have changed. So it's interesting that there is actually no legal minimum age limit on volunteering. So a child can volunteer, someone under 16, but they can't be, you cannot leave a child in charge of another child. So they shouldn't be responsible for supervising anybody else under the age of 16. That should be done by somebody over the age of 16. If you are having people volunteer on your yard and their children, they're under 16, then they do need parental consent to do that. So you need to obtain written consent from a parent or guardian who is legally responsible for them. So that's the main consideration. And it's always advisable for 16, 17-year-olds, it's also advisable to get some form of consent from their parent or guardian as well, just to kind of cover yourselves. But legally speaking, anyone under the age of 16 needs to have consent. In terms of like paying volunteers, because it's quite murky, the world of volunteering. If you are a genuine volunteer, obviously you do not need to be paid if you're a genuine volunteer. But if you've got people on the yard who do exactly the same as your employed staff, then they are not volunteers. If they are doing the same duties, the same hours, have the same sorts of responsibilities as your employed staff, then legally speaking, they're not volunteers. They're working and they should be paid minimum wage. So just be really clear. I always think, it's fine to have Saturday helpers at a riding school, leading the ponies around for an hour or two, or take the ponies back down to the field when they'd finished, that sort of thing. But you must be responsible for those. If you've got children doing it, you need to oversee that happening, and you need to make sure that they haven't got the same responsibilities as your employed staff. And I think that's the main summary of volunteers. I don't know if anyone's got any questions about volunteering.
There is one actually in the chat from a Lucy, great name. So when we have work placement students not paid, e.g. school work experience, vet student, college, do we need a volunteer agreement? Claire, that's one for you.
Yeah, I would say you should have a So if a college is sending them as a work placement, there should be some sort of agreement between you and the college that's sending them, or you and the person volunteering. So they should be. Also, you need to make sure that they're covered by your employer's liability insurance, because they should be, but not all insurances cover them. So just make sure, give your insurer a call and just check that they will cover you for having a work placement student, because that's really key, is that anyone who is doing any kind of work on your yard, be that volunteering or be that work placement or be that an employee, needs to be covered by your employer's liability. Sure.
And just one to remember on that they are only a work placement student if they're coming through a formal path, be it school or college. You can't just bring someone in, say, oh, give them the title, oh, you're a work placement student, and then not pay them and they do all the work. That would be non-compliant with national minimum wage. So be careful on that one too.
So also thinking about, when yard managers think about the people working on the yard, they often think about the people that they are employing or using the services of. They don't necessarily think of other people that might be working on the yard. So, for example, I know that there's lots of yards that have their parents or their kids or their siblings or their friends that might come and help on the yard. But obviously, people need to consider the implications of this. I mean, not so long ago, there was a news story about a livery yard, and it was the husband had a mate come to help do some repairs on the roof of the stables, and he'd fallen through the roof of the stables, and they'd ended up paying out a lot of money because he'd had life-changing injuries and they hadn't taken the necessary precautions. So where does the kind of scope of people working on the yard reach, and what general considerations should people be making when it comes to, regardless of what roles people might be working on the yard, but just making sure that they're covering themselves?
I think I'm answering that one, but mainly it's under employer's liability insurance and obviously your own health and safety. So first of all, checking that if somebody's coming and working for you, they're one of these employment statuses. So either they're employed, they're a worker, or they are a volunteer and a genuine volunteer, or they are self-employed. Self-employed, they obviously should have their own employer's liability insurance, but it is worth checking with your insurance provider who does it cover on our yard. But also your health and safety is really important. Again, that's where on the EEA website, one of our most popular online tools is our risk assessment creator, which holds your hand through the production of all your risk assessments. And I know we all get so about health and safety, it's so annoying, but actually it's not. It's a really, the paperwork, we hold your hand and make the paperwork production easy, or as easy as it can be, because you don't have to think. We've planted a load of options for you to fill in these elements, but it does make you actually think, is that safe? Is that the best way I could be doing it? So that's it's minimize the risk. Assess the risk, minimize the risk. That's as simple as it is. But it's amazing how many yards do nothing on health and safety, nothing. And we just formed a partnership with a company called IMG, where we are now, we have a discounted rate for our members on their fire risk assessment. Oh, there we go. Somebody's just jumped in about that. So our fire risk assessment, go and have a look on our website, and we have a discounted rate. I mean, if I were to survey 5,000 yards in the UK who has a fire risk assessment for their yard, and most importantly also for their groom's accommodation, yeah, I think we'd probably be looking at a very, very low percentage that do. And this is a non-compliance, I'm afraid, and there's heavy fines for it. So we have taken that one on. We've helped our members, and yet again, you look in the join menu on our website, you'll find all the information. But you've got to have a fire risk assessment. You must do. It's legally required. So yeah, so there we go. Let's move on. Conscious of time.
Yeah, it's also just to back up what you were saying, Lucy, is I work alongside an insurance company as well, and I've learned over the years that having everything down on paper is really key, because it's great walking around and thinking, oh yeah, I must make sure that's done. I've told the employees that needs to be done. But actually, if something happens and you can give whoever it may be, a piece of paper that says, yeah, this is our policy for this, or this is our risk assessment, it obviously shows that you're doing the due diligence, and that you've got that proof, rather than it being some sort of whimsical thing in the back of your mind that you might or not have done. So definitely having good records is a bonus.
And just, sorry, one thing, just on risk assessments, you don't have to, the fire risk assessment, there's a line which is really important, which is that it has to be done by a competent person. Okay, and this is one, it's public news, so I'm not afraid to share it. But Izzy Taylor, who's an event rider, got found out on this, and if you just Google it, you'll find the case where she didn't have a fire risk assessment, and I think in the end she did get one done, but it wasn't by a competent person. But a competent person is not myself, Claire, or Cheryl. Okay, we're not. A competent person is somebody that is trained in delivering a fire risk assessment. Okay, you can do your own risk assessments for the yard. You are all competent because you're aware of your yard. Okay, but for a fire risk assessment, the law states that it must be done by a competent person, and that's not me, Claire, or Cheryl, and almost certainly not yourself either. But you only have to pay for it once, or it could be done for a big yard. You probably have to do it for once every however many years. But for a smaller yard, especially if you have accommodation, if nothing changes, you can renew it yourself, as in you can review it and say nothing's changed, I reviewed it. That's a good thing to do for your own paperwork, but you don't have to pay every single year to have a fire risk assessment on the same thing. So just be really clear of that. It's a one-off. But if you have grooms accommodation and you don't have a fire risk assessment, please go to our website, have a look. You really should be doing this.
Yeah, that's really good information, Lucy. Now onto a subject that I think Lucy really likes talking about, and that's working pupils. And I'm just going to leave it there and let you answer.
Oh, just don't use that phrase. Why are people still using it? That it's moronic, and that is what it is, because there's no such thing as a working pupil. I mean, I can't believe I'm still talking about this. Like Cheryl, literally 20 years worth of don't use this phrase. There is no such phrase. It's just a thing the horse world likes to use, and it's the problem is we've researched it and we're not going to research anymore because we know the answer, and the HMRC also know the answer. So if you use the phrase working pupil and you splatter it over your website and your Facebook and everything else, you're basically putting your hand up to the HMRC and saying, hi, I'm just doing illegal employment, because there is no such thing as come and work for me, you're a pupil, I'm going to give you everything for free and I'm not going to pay you. It just doesn't exist. So listen, this is the advice we give to employers, and I do it on a regular basis. Don't use the phrase working pupil. Offer somebody a position of employment with training opportunities. Okay? And this is what you can do. You have to employ somebody. You have to pay them the national minimum wage for every hour that they work. Simple as that, just like anyone else. You can invite them to bring their own horse, and you can charge them for their own horse. But if you do that, critically, you must have a livery agreement with them, because that's what they would be, is a livery. So again, get it from our website. You must have a livery agreement with them because they are a livery. And then you can choose whether to charge them or not. I would recommend you do charge them for that livery, for that horse. And then you must invoice them every month for the livery of the horse. So that's the horse bit dealt with. Then let's deal with the training. You cannot charge somebody to train during working hours on your horses. Okay, HMRC are really clear about that. So you can't say, oh, well, you're going to come here and I'm going to charge you £100 a week to ride all of my horses and I'm going to teach you whilst you're on them. It doesn't work. HMRC says, well, yeah, but hang on a minute. Those horses are part of your business. So you can't charge somebody to be riding them, because part of the task of the horse needs to be ridden during the day. So anyway, so you can't charge for them. But what you can do is you can charge if you're going to sit in the corner and teach somebody, or walk around in circles and teach someone on their horse, you can charge for that. Okay, now that would be non-working time, just to be clear. So let's just call it an hour lunch break. But if Jenny wants to have a lesson with you 3 times a week on her own horse for 30 minutes during her hour lunch break, let's just say, you can charge her for that. But again, that needs to be an invoice. So you can charge her what you like. If your half an hour rate is £40, you can charge her £40 3 times a week. But you have to give her that. less than 3 times a week, but then on an invoice, it can be charged for. That's the only way to do it. Okay, and sensible riders don't even touch it anymore. But unfortunately, in the eventing world, they still want to use the phrase and they still want to do it, and they're all going to get found out by the HMRC, because I'm afraid the equestrian world has moved on from that. There we go. That's my
summarised.
I just add, in terms of like working pupil positions, obviously, as Lucy said, totally not a thing. But what we do have are apprenticeships, and that would be the right way of going through in terms of training, getting somebody who is a trainee who perhaps doesn't have all that experience. You can look to provide apprenticeships. An apprentice has to come through a government recognised training scheme. Can't just be something that you've made up yourself and decided that they're going to be your apprentice. They must come through, you know, usually from a college or a local training provider. And you can then, they will be on an apprenticeship. So they will work for you some of the time, and then they will train some of the time. And for those people, you can pay them the apprentice rate, so it is a lower rate of pay than they would usually get on the minimum wage, but you can only pay that apprentice rate in the first year of their apprenticeship, and after that they go to the minimum wage for their age group. So if they are 21 plus, then the second year of apprenticeship they're going to be paid 12.21 an hour. But it's the only sort of equivalent. It's not an equivalent to the working pupil, but it's a way of training and working at the same time. So definitely, if you're thinking I'm going to take on somebody that is going to train with me, ultimately make sure it's an apprenticeship, because it's the best way to do it.
For my next question, Lucy's kind of already half answered it when she was just talking about working pupils, which was the fact that you can't top up wages with livery or training, which I assume applies to any employee. But what about accommodation? Because a lot of positions say that they include livery and accommodation. So where does it stand with accommodation status?
So accommodation is the only thing that you can deduct from an employee's gross pay. However, there is what's called the accommodation offset rate. So what that means is there is the accommodation offset rate of 10.66 per day, or it's 74.62 a week, and that comes off the employee's wage before tax, but it cannot. If they are paid the minimum wage, that is the most that you can deduct from their wages for that accommodation. If you're giving accommodation for free, that accommodation offset is then added on top of the wages for the purposes of calculating the minimum wage, because it's all just about calculating the minimum wage. If you're charging for accommodation, it can't bring them below that. It can't bring them below the minimum wage. All you can do is apply that accommodation offset rate.
I wouldn't give it for free nowadays. I think that's bonkers.
No, it's a bit mad, really, isn't it? But some people do as a sort of perk to try, to entice people. They say, oh, we'll give free accommodation. I mean, if you can afford to do that.
Minimum wage has gone up so much, I wouldn't give it for free.
But this is it.
Unpopular with grooms, but got to learn how much it costs to live, and you're not even going to learn that by your accommodation offset rate.
No, because it's just. But in terms of as Lucy said, like training, livery for horses, we would always say have a separate agreement. You can never deduct anything like that from gross wages. So you can take it out of groom's wages, take it out of their net though, and you can have a separate agreement. Our contract creator has a separate agreement. You can choose to add livery in. But you would say that is deducted. That's a separate agreement between yourself and your employer, and you will charge X amount for livery, and that is taken after all of their net salary is calculated.
Yeah. See, this is exactly the sort of thing. It's worth people just joining the EEA, because there's so many things that that normal people don't.
It's a minefield. And once you start, I mean, my background is HR, but it's in I worked in a further education college. So until I joined the EEA, I'd never even considered charges for accommodation, charges for livery, and what that looks like. But actually, it is pretty complex. But that's what the contract creator is there to do. It's to take that complexity out of it and just go, do you want to charge for your accommodation? And it will ask you yes or no. And then if so, are you charging the offset rate? And you'll say yes or no. And it's all done for you then. And then if you've still got questions, that's what we're here for, to help you out.
Yes, definitely great for the support. So talking about perks of employment, I always see a lot of yard owners, whether it's riding schools, livery yards, that they're struggling to not just recruit staff, but also to retain them as well. So they might have someone that comes and does a month and then inexplicably just ups and leaves because they've found a better job or it's not for them. What can employers do, firstly, to try and find suitable staff, and secondly, to try and make sure that they keep them?
I would say make yourself a good employer. That's the first thing. Make sure you are legally compliant. Make sure you've got your health and safety in order. Make sure that you are just generally a good employer. Join the EEA, get advice. If you're not sure, find out, get some support. Create a good atmosphere in your team. So think about mental health and well-being is such a huge issue nowadays. Think about your staff's mental health and well-being. What can you do to support them? Have you got training? Have you got, if you've got staff that have got a particular interest in competition prep, are you able to offer opportunities with that so that they can do a little bit of that, they can gain experience? Just about keeping a happy team, and then if you've got that happy team, you're more likely to retain your staff. I think if you are a good employer, you will keep staff. It's if you're a bad employer, if you don't get it, if you don't pay legally, if you don't do the things that you are legally required to do, or if you're not particularly kind and pleasant towards your staff, if you don't care about your staff, that's when you find you've got problems. I don't know if you'd agree, Lucy.
Yeah, I do agree with that. But there's another one. Be professional. Keep the distance with your staff. I have this conversation on my WhatsApp rant. I have this conversation also regularly with employers. Stop being their best friend. I mean, because I think that's also where things go wrong, and lack of professionalism in the sense of everything being done on WhatsApp. WhatsApp's there for, can you turn Harry the horse out? Can you do this? Can you do those kind of conversations? But I mean, so often all employment issues and conversations are happening on WhatsApp. It's so not professional. And if the yard is well run, and we have many of our members of the EEA who are great, not good employers, they're great employers, but they always have the same element of conversation on that, which is that employer acts as an employer, is an employer. There's a distance, a natural distance between their employees and them. And what I mean by that is that they put contracts on emails. They deal with anything to do with HR on an email. So there's a professionalism. And I think grooms employees respect that. We all respect that. And then you get a level of respect within that yard. And it's a funny one because it makes a massive difference. Just having that level of organisation and professionalism, and not being friends on Facebook. Don't be friends on Facebook with your staff. They're not your friends. They're your staff. And this is too often, it's merged in the horse world, and then it becomes, it becomes the lines become merged. And I don't think that is a healthy way to be. So although we all know the horse world is not 9 till 5, there's also always going to be these extra hours and what have you. If you can create a bit of more of a 9 till 5 business structure, I think it really does create a better working atmosphere.
Right, so I see it quite often as well, between liveries and yard owners as well, is that it's just that line of professionalism struggles to exist, and then they become friends with their liveries, and then when there's problems, it exacerbates the problem because then, oh, that's not my livery, that's my friend, and yes, definitely, yeah, for yard owners, whether it's their staff or their liveries, anybody, any professionals or business contacts, you always have to make sure that you maintain that level of professionalism from how you act to how you speak to how you communicate. Yeah, that's exactly. I do find that one of the biggest struggles, I think, in the business aspects that a lot of yard owners aren't used to, you know, if they're not in that sort of work frame of mind. Talking about staying professional, if a business owner, sorry, has a problem with a member of staff, what do they need to be aware of the way that they perhaps need to follow specific procedures as defined by the law when it comes to managing problems or dismissing people even?
So I always say start off with a good policy. So make sure you've got a performance improvement or capability policies in place so that you've got a starting point. If you've got an issue, you can then go through that policy. It will have a step-by-step guide as to basically how you should deal with that. And then your employee is going to know how they're going to be dealt with if an issue arises. So they're going to know that. They're going to be straight off the bat, they're going to know how this is going to play out. Always meet really regularly with your staff. So if you need to address performance issues, it's better that it doesn't come completely out of the blue. If you've been meeting regularly with your staff and reviewing their performance, it shouldn't come as a surprise if there is an issue, because it'll have been highlighted to them perhaps just after it's happened, or you will have discussed it with them previously. So that's not going to be a surprise. If you get to the end of the road and you feel like you do need to dismiss somebody, make sure you have followed your process, because if in the event of you being then bringing a claim for unfair dismissal, then you will need to show that you have followed a policy and that you have investigated and done everything that you can to rectify that issue before you dismiss them. If it's an issue of gross misconduct, you can dismiss on the spot for gross misconduct, but you will need to show that it was gross misconduct and you haven't just randomly sacked them. At the moment, as the law stands, you can't an employee can't bring a claim for unfair dismissal unless they've been with you for 2 years or more. The government are looking to change that, and they're looking for unfair dismissal rights from day one. So that's why I think it's really, really important that if you are looking to dismiss, you do go through a proper procedure before you dismiss that person. Make sure that any communication, as Lucy's saying, isn't over WhatsApp. Make sure everything is written down and evidenced and it's in an email or a letter. Don't, text somebody you're fired, because that's not professional, and it's not going to stand up in an employment tribunal either. So just make sure that you're really professional. And my other tip would be to have a probationary period. So when you take on a member of staff, make sure that they've got a probationary period in their contract. And then you've both got an opportunity to talk about whether it's working out, whether there are any issues that you think you need to address. And, whether if it isn't the right job for them or if they're not performing, you can then dismiss them in a way that, they've not passed their probationary period. And it's just easier for everybody that way. So it's always good. That's my main tip, is to always include the probationary period. And then you've got that period of review when someone's just started.
It's really important to always have those open lines of communication as well if you're an employer, because if your staff know that they can come and speak to you and that you can go and speak to them, it definitely would resolve perhaps some issues before they became something that had silently been bubbling until it becomes too much. So yeah, and that again, as you're saying, Claire, is another perfect reason why it's really important to dot the I's and cross the T's in all your paperwork and keep records of everything. So we're heading towards the end now. So do you see any changes in the next generation of grooms that are coming through the system? There's reports that there's less coming through sort of the equine colleges, coming through doing the diplomas or the degrees, and that's perhaps a reason why people are finding the quality of staff and the recruitment, finding the right number of staff, harder. Where do you see the sort of future of the industry at the moment going for yard owners when it comes to being able to find suitable, competent staff?
So colleges, I don't think anything's changed on that for 15 years, to be honest. I think colleges are there, they're the place, they're not going anywhere. I think the biggest problem with our industry is poor employment. too many yards not adhering. There's someone else calling us. Silence. Too many yards not adhering to good employment. So young person comes out of college, they go and work with horses, or they do it during their work experience, and they have a poor experience, and they go, I'm not going to do that. And so we lose. There is a permanent drain from young people who want, often young people, or youngish people that want to work with horses, and they have a bad experience, and then they leave the industry. We hear it on a weekly, daily basis. And that's really sad, because imagine if they actually all had a nice workplace. They're practical people, they want to work with horses, and they're poorly treated, poorly paid, below the national minimum wage, no leave, no work-life balance, and it goes on, and then they're burnt out and they go. There's also another issue. This is my other big topic, which is we can talk about for far too long, and I won't dwell on it. But I think we've got a really big future problem, which is that we've got a changing generation. Okay, and I think that those, when I go and do the college talks, there's a level of I'm not saying they're all super rich, but there's a level of affluence, because to have a horse nowadays, you have to have money in your bank. I'm afraid you, or parents or guardians, have to have money in the bank. And usually when there's some level of affluence, there's also a level of ambition that comes usually with the affluence, which means that doing a manual role, as which working with horses is not always in keeping with what the young person wants to achieve. Do you see what I mean? So what that means is that and I buck that trend. I went to one of the best schools in the UK, amazingly. Not academic. Don't know how I got into it. Don't know how I got through it. But and all I wanted to do was work with horses. So there's always going to be the anomalies, and I absolutely put my hand up, and I'm one of them. And many are. And is there enough actually? Are there enough anomalies to buck to if we get good employment for our industry to have enough staff? Maybe so. But what I definitely am seeing with the college students is that, and the university students, is that they do not aspire to work with horses in any way, shape, or form, because they have different aspirations. So what we've got to do, the solution to this problem, which is a problem, and I don't, if I'm honest, think that our industry leaders take it seriously enough, and they do in horse racing, but not on our side of the industry. But we're making progress on that. But what we need to do is make our industry a place of only good employment. It's as simple as that. And everyone on this call will be a good that's listening or wants to listen will have the desire to be a good employer. Even if you're not quite ticking all those boxes, come and find us. We'll help you, and you'll become a good employer. And what we say good employment is, number one, correct employment status of all staff. Number two, contracts of employment for all staff. Number three, being paid by PAYE and at least the national minimum wage, and adhering to all those laws. And then obviously giving your staff their 28 days paid holiday or pro rata, and being a kind, fair, caring employer. Okay, that's good employment. It's not difficult, and it's what is the base minimum, to be honest with you. But we've got to resolve that in our industry, because otherwise we're going to continue with the drain, and we've not got enough of a pool coming in.
Yeah, there's definitely room for improvement. Roxy has asked a question which I think is something that a lot of people struggle with, and I presume she is meaning somebody that isn't employed, but she says, how, for example, do you educate old school show jumpers regarding employment regulations? I presume that she means, do you have any tips? So I would suggest that means, how do you drag someone into the 21st century?
I'm guessing we're talking about people rather than horses.
Yeah.
Horses would be probably more compliant. Any tips?
Suggest they join the EEA. That's my first.
Yeah, get them to join the EEA. Do some name drops. I mean, we're happy to name drop from our website because we're allowed to. We've given permission. I mean, Nick Skelton is a member of the EEA. All of his staff are employed legally. Trevor Breen is another show jumper who allows us to use his name. I mean, we've got many riders who are on the world class program, are members of the EEA. I mean, frankly, there will reach a point where, if you're doing it old school, you will be left behind. And then the other thing I do when I do my college talks is I really encourage the young people and those older as well, only accept positions of good employment. But together, You know, this should be more talked about. It should be bigger and louder, because what's happening is that these old school show jumpers who are paying below the national minimum wage and doing it all wrong, what they're doing is they're damaging our industry. They're damaging our workforce pool. They're undercutting the good modern show jumper up the road rather. And I'd be really angry if I was an employer. If I was running a livery yard and the one down the road was doing it all wrong and undercutting me, I'd be really, really peed off, to be honest. And I think people should get more peed off, and I think they should get called out, these bad employers, because they're doing so much damage.
Yeah, I don't think it's just employment. I think there's a lot of just in general old school yard owners for everything from employment and welfare. And oh, we didn't need insurance back then, so we don't bother with it now, you know. And I think exactly like you say, Lucy, it's things like that that people cut out that then means that they're undercutting the people that are trying to do it compliantly, who are then having to charge more, and it becomes a vicious circle because the people that aren't doing it properly are actually more affordable and therefore more appealing to horse owners than the ones that are actually doing it belt and braces as they should be, which then sends out a whole false message to everybody, and it's just complicated for the people, you know, the older generation, should we say.
Yeah. And Roxy, we hear your pain, but do point them to the EEA, because the EEA is where it's at. And
yeah, we do have members who are, you know, of a generation where these things weren't, you know, it wasn't, it, like you said, didn't have insurance, don't know why we have to pay people the minimum wage. We do have, and often they will have a younger yard manager, for example, who will say, oh, hang on a second, shall we join the EEA? And then they'll ring me up and they'll ask for advice, and they'll say, could you just speak to my boss? And then I'll be on the phone with the owner and trying to explain to them, actually, you know, you've got to do it by the book, because it's the law. It's not optional to pay minimum wage. It's not optional to you know, abide by having the relevant insurance. It is the law. And so it's kind of educating people, I think, about the consequences of not complying, and saying, yeah, you might want to do it the old school way because in your day they didn't have to have insurance, but actually now you do, and this is the consequence of not having insurance. So I think it's about sort of educating people, and that's what we ultimately are trying to do. We have good employment where we really push the educational side of things and saying, be a good employer, and these are the reasons why you need to be a good employer. So yeah, I think it's just about, like you say, about educating people.
Conscious to answer Lucy's question, Cheryl and Claire, just which is all about staff not adhering to the rules. Very simply, yes, you can follow it up with disciplinary action. Be quite serious. Again, that's about you. If your rule is that there is no jewellery on the yard, then be formal. Put it in writing, formal letter, hand it to them. This is your first warning. You have not adhered to the policy, and the policy is this, and this is the policy, and if you continue in this way, this is not compliant with our yard. And for anybody that wants to create a staff handbook using our staff handbook creator, we actually have a letter which we've even written for you, which says, dear so and so, I have read the handbook, a sign here, for your employees to write, and we recommend you do that. And again, that's from the beginning. If you, within your next person that comes along in the induction, you sit them down, this is the rules, this is the way it is, there's no flex on this, this is what we do, this is what we expect at this establishment. And I think if those grooms, for example, went and worked, let's just say for the royal household at Windsor in the Mews, and those were the rules, would they break the rules there? The answer would probably be no, because there would be quite a distance between the management and the employees, do you see? So you need to be a little bit more like that. And I know that's difficult when it's a small team, but again, start it from the beginning. But yeah, be firm. They're your rules, your business.
I think it's the same. It's going back to what we were saying at the beginning, whether it's trying to educate old school people or explaining the rules to your staff or having reasons for risk assessments or insurance. Everything is there to protect everybody. I think some people think that the world's against them, you know, not a cost for this, a cost for that, or paperwork, but ultimately it's all things there to be professional and to protect all parties. And I guess it's just trying to get that across. Lucy, my second to last question to you, or Claire even, do you feel that the government or regulating bodies could do more to help the equestrian industry in terms of training and employment and compliance going forwards?
Yes, we so we have a couple of things. One, which we are we want those employers that are doing it wrong to get found out. I'm sorry if that's bad, that's not popular news, but I think that we should, because they're criminals and they're doing it wrong and it's hurting everyone, as we've already discussed. So one of the problems is when an employer or worker reports to the HMRC, there's currently not a code for equestrian, and there should be. So we're campaigning. Claire, do remind me to send another email on that. We're campaigning for there to be a code, because then we can then it puts even more pressure on the HMRC when it comes in for equestrian. But they know the equestrian industry is not compliant. What my bugbear is, if I'm really honest, is that we as the BGA and the EEA, two little organisations that receive funding from no one. Did you realise that? Did everyone know? We don't get any funding. No one gives us any money to do this. We have to encourage membership and be delightful to our sponsors, and you know, so no one gives us money. But what I find a little frustrating is that the government, there's no funding scheme for good little organisations like us, which there are other ones as well in other sectors, to help employers. And I think there should be more support for little organisations like us who are genuinely trying to help employers. And a good example would be our HMRC webinars. So the HMRC do a lot of webinars to help people to understand the compliance of national minimum wage, but they do them with people in offices and people in builders workshop, you know, building construction sites in hard hats. We said, well, we need to make them a little bit more applicable to the equestrian environment. So they did actually, and on our website we have a whole load that are equestrian specific. But I think a little bit more funding would, for organisations like ourselves who are genuine. We are a social enterprise. We want to help people. We want to make the equestrian world a better place. That would be nice. A bit more funding, or any funding, actually.
So, although we've mentioned and discussed about what the EEA offer quite a lot, Claire, do you just want to tell us a bit about membership if people are watching this and thinking actually they could? Is it something that's affordable for them? They've only got one member of staff, for example. What can the EEA offer its members?
So Lucy is going to share our benefits page just so that you guys can see what we offer. But in a nutshell, we are £49.50 a year. And for that, you get access to our contract creator, which we spoke loads about. So you can create your own bespoke contracts. You can create as many as you want. We've got options for apprenticeship contracts. As Lucy said, we have also got the 0 hours contract. It's not within the contract creator, but it is downloadable elsewhere on the website. We have the risk assessment creator, so we spoke a little bit about that, but you can create bespoke risk assessments for your business as well. So literally there are so many options, and you can do a completely bespoke risk assessment for anything. We have got the livery contract creator on there as well, so again you can create livery contracts. And we have the staff handbook creator. So when I was speaking earlier a little bit about the policies and having a really good performance management policy, if you use our staff handbook creator, you will get a I can't even remember, we've just added to it recently, it's just all been reviewed, so it's totally up to date. And you will get a number of policies that you can pull off there. You can add your own. So we talked a bit about yard rules and people not wearing jewellery. You can include your own yard rules and your own policies in there as well. And you can pull that handbook creator off, give it to your staff so that they've got a staff handbook with all of your policies in, and then there's no excuse why they're not following them, because they should have them when when you've produced it. You can give that to them. We have the pension and payroll. So we have discounted rates available with our own payroll provider, so they can look after your pension contributions and your payroll for you. We've got free job adverts. You can get your adverts onto our board in conjunction with the BGA as well. So you can use the BGA site. We've got, as Lucy's already talked about, we've got the fire risk assessments as well. So in partnership with IMG, you get 15% discount on your fire risk assessment, and that is an in-person service. So someone from IMG will come out and assess your yard in person. And along with all of that, you get access to myself as an advisor. So if we have member questions, you can use the contact form, you can give us a call. We will do our best to help you with any HR questions. If it's a complex legal issue, then we've got our legal advice line as well. So you can call our partners Right Hassle if you have got a employment law issue that you want to discuss with them. Have I missed anything off, Lisa? We've got regular communication.
Yeah, a lot for £49.50 for the year. It's a silly price. We're always far too cheap, but come and join us and also pay it forward. Tell your friends, because we need to grow our industry to become this place of good employment, and that's how we're going to achieve it.
Right, that's been very helpful. I think we've busted some myths about employment. I will send out the recording of this, and I will also send out the link that Lucy's just added into the chat, all about the equestrian employers, how you can join them and what they offer. I'll send a link to the BGA as well, because that might be useful for people's staff if they would like to join. And anything else I can think of that will be useful. I'll send that out either tomorrow or the day after. I'll check with Claire and Lucy, but I'll also put some contact details on there. So if anyone has any specific questions about their situation or how the EEA could help them, obviously you can get in contact with them direct. But otherwise, thank you very much to Lucy and Claire for giving up part of their afternoon to tell us all about their favourite topics. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your day, everybody.
No problem. Thank you for having us. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.